I'm Kento. For the last few years, I've been living in Tokyo, but 2020 changed everything. The pandemic turned the world upside down. In Tokyo, we had more freedoms than a lot of other countries, but we still felt the effects. In a city of almost 14 million people, I still felt isolated and depressed. So I packed up my life and moved to Enoshima. These are my stories. It's 2021 and the sun still shines. It's hard to think back to pre-COVID times, but 2020 in Tokyo was supposed to be a big year. Tokyo was preparing to host the Olympics, and the city was on track for an increase in tourism and economic activity. I was working as a film editor and photographer, and it was looking like it would be a busy year. I had also made a resolution that I would go out and meet more people. But going out wasn't in the cards. And just like many people, I felt isolation and loneliness set in. Something had to change. So at the end of the year, I quit my job, moved out of the concrete jungle and to the beachside town of Kitase Kaigan. The vibe here is chill, and people are generally friendlier than in Tokyo. Shops close earlier, and life balance seems, well, a little more balanced. On this first episode, I'll chat to my good buddy and scientist, Eli Lyons, about life in Enoshima, kite surfing, and his company's work in DNA sequencing. Hey dude, thanks for having this chat.
No worries.
First off, why did you come to Japan?
I came to Japan about 10 years ago. It was October 2011, so after the Fukushima disaster.
Oh wow.
I came as a PhD student at University of Tokyo, which is, especially at that time, was a prestigious university, and didn't like it that much, but I published a paper there, started doing some other things, and now I've been working in Japan and co-founded a startup here.
What made you move to Enoshima?
Yeah, so when I moved to Japan, I was really excited to live in Tokyo, and I was younger, and I had lived as an exchange student in Taipei, Taiwan before, so I had gotten a taste of kind of really exciting city life. But after living in Tokyo for a while, I think I had had enough. I mean, you lived in Tokyo, so you kind of know how fun it can be and how convenient it is and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think when you first get there, like I was like a moth to the flame. I sort of was like, oh my god, bright lights, this is all amazing. And then after you get through the honeymoon phase, you're sort of you see the underlying issues.
Yeah. And then it's like, well, you like moving anywhere, maybe it takes a while to like figure out how to move out to, or, you know, if you're gonna leave your job for a while, or, you know, just not have a job. But when I was traveling out of Tokyo, maybe that's when I would notice the things that were kind of intense about Tokyo. Like when I would go back to my hometown in the US, where it was quieter, there's less light pollution, or when I'd travel in Southeast Asia or Sri Lanka, I'd just notice how much better I slept when there was less light pollution, noise pollution, and just like not, you know, going out and partying or whatever it is.
And
so how did I end up? Yeah. So I think I wanted to get out of Tokyo for those reasons, and COVID gave me an opportunity to do that in a way, because we decided on my team that we would be working remote really early on. It was a really easy decision on a small team, and we were using a co-working space, so it was easy to cancel that agreement. Basically, you just had to give like a month's notice or something. So, you know, we predicted that it was going to go on for a while, so we were just like, okay, we're going to go fully remote, and we were already working semi-remote. That's like gave me the opportunity to do so, and I came down to Shonan on a couple trips to see what it was like here. and to also see about doing kite surfing here. And it seemed like a good area, and it seemed like I could do some kite surfing, so that was it.
So what do you like about Enoshima?
One was quieter, fewer tall buildings. Like, I know it sounds kind of weird, but when I go back to Tokyo, that's one of the things I always notice. Like when you are in the shadow of buildings and you're not as exposed to sunlight or the elements. I can basically go to the beach. We do go to the beach almost every day.
Yeah.
At least, I try to at least go for sunset, or at least once a day. The other things was, it actually wasn't as expensive as I expected for, I think, the quality of life here.
Now you're here, what are some of the best things about living in Enoshima?
So when I was in Tokyo, for a long time I lived in 1DK, not even a 1LDK.
So explain what that is to people, because I only found out what that was when I came to Japan. It's not a thing in...
Right. So the housing layouts are standardized. So you have initials for kind of the components of the layout. So a 1DK would be a 1-bedroom dining kitchen combo.
Yeah.
And a 1LDK would be living room dining kitchen. So you have it essentially would be a larger apartment. But a 1DK, like my apartment was 20 square meters. I had a big terrace, but 20 square meters for your whole apartment is pretty small.
Yeah, it's tiny.
And I'm on the 12th floor. Like a 1LDK might be like 25 or maybe 30 square meters. I was living in an apartment from the 80s, 20 square meters, like near a hospital that had ambulances coming by. And it was just not healthy.
It's probably hard for a lot of people to sort of gauge how small 20 square meters is.
Yeah.
It really is not a lot of space once you start putting furniture in those sorts of places.
Yeah. My friend that came to visit me, he said it's like living in a boat when he saw my apartment. And I think that's a pretty accurate description. And my new place is twice the size. And I have a view of Enoshima Island and close to the beach. That allows me to work remotely and just also live much more comfortably. And I think another thing I like about Enoshima is just that having friends like you and Dai that are around.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, that I can actually hang out with. I can just ring you guys up and we can go meet up at the beach or whatever.
What attracted you to kite surfing?
So I started kite surfing in California, but I didn't have a chance to really continue it much when I came to Japan. Although when I started traveling in Southeast Asia or back to the US, I would go kite surfing on my travels, but didn't really get to do it in Japan. So I had done it before and I really missed it living in Tokyo. And there's not that many people that kite surf around here for various reasons. I guess one is maybe expensive gear, or there's a lot of older windsurfers, older surfers, and in Japan or maybe everywhere, older people kind of end up sticking to what they know instead of trying new things. And also, especially in Enoshima, it seems that surfing has become kind of like a tourist attraction rather than like a hobby or sport.
Yeah, there's days I won't go out into the water because they look like ants out there. It's insane. And even when there's no waves, there'll be people out there. It's crazy.
Well, people just come to sit in the water rather than try and catch a wave, or like sometimes I wonder like what people are actually trying to do. Like they're just kind of like walking with their board and.
Well, it's a look. It's their thing. I think people get so into what they're doing, and I also think if you're coming from Tokyo, that's your escape from the monotony of work and being on the depressing trains and stuff, is that you get down here and there's no waves and you're like, oh well, fuck it, what else are we going to do? Let's
and Japanese usually schedule something in advance and they do it regardless of the conditions, for better or for worse. But the Yeah. So and I get it too. Like like you said, you know everyone like wants to get an escape from their work and come down and take a surf lesson or something.
Yeah. So let's go back a bit. What is kite surfing?
So you have a kite that's kind of like a parachute almost, or it might look like a parachute. And you have two types of boards generally. One is like a twin tip, which is kind of like a snowboard shape. And one is a directional, which is kind of like a surfboard, like a smaller surfboard. And you also have a harness that's kind of similar to a windsurf harness that you use to kind of attach to the kite. So you're not like actually holding on the force of the kite, or
just with your arms.
With your arms.
Right.
So it kind of, you have to get some gear to get started, as you know, from seeing my gear. But yeah, it's a really fun sport. And there's, at least on these beaches, there's very few people doing it, which is nice for me.
Yeah. But I mean, one of the downsides here, it seems, is that there's not always the wind to be able to do the kite surfing.
Yeah. I kind of balance that out by living here. So when there's wind, I can take an hour or two off and just go.
Yeah.
It's like also nice to be able to sit in my room and like just look outside and see the trees on the mountain, and I can tell by how much the branches are moving if it's going to be good or not.
Yeah, it sounds so sad that I just sit inside my house.
Well,
and
no,
look
I
out
mean
the
like
window.
actually I'm working,
Yeah.
but I can. It's nice to have scenery, and then like the added thing of like, okay, I can take a break, maybe in a couple hours, have something else to do.
There's no way you could like be in Tokyo and be like, oh, I just want to go out. The wind's up. Let's go.
Yeah.
The interesting thing I found when I filmed you doing some kite surfing the other day is the height that you like boost out of the water.
Basically, use the power of the kite to lift you out of the water, but you need to do it in a controlled way so you don't hurt yourself or other people.
Yeah.
And there's other ways to get higher boosts. So you can use little waves as ramps, for example, to get additional air, or you can be overpowered, kind of have a lot of wind power in your kite. So you can be overpowered by using like a larger kite for the wind conditions.
Yeah. So if somebody wants to get into kite surfing, how do they go about it?
I would say even before you start getting into kite surfing, make sure you get comfortable in the water. Then you can do lots of water sports, and maybe kite surfing is one of those water sports you get into. I know you're very comfortable in the water. You're a good swimmer. You've used to be a dive instructor. And so you know how a lot of people panic in the water under certain situations. And like, you know, both of us have the experience of being on this beach and people are unaware of their surroundings, just in the way.
Yeah.
So I think like a big thing is just like learning to swim, not panic, maybe read the waves a bit. I guess I'm talking about people who aren't really experienced in water sports, but I feel like that's something that's maybe overlooked.
And I'd say that's one good thing about Enoshima is that there's really easy conditions here.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time there's not even waves. So I'd say it's a good place to be able to learn to get comfortable in the water.
Yeah, and you have a couple different beaches. So some of the beaches are even flatter. For kite surfing, most people should probably take lessons and learn to do it safely. And the cool thing about kite surfing is there's lots of different styles. So you can use twin tips and do boosts and tricks, and you can learn to ride a directional and ride waves. So I like all those parts of it.
So you're a scientist.
Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about your company and DNA sequencing.
Yeah.
So let's start with what about your company and what it does.
So our company provides software for synthetic biology research and development. And synthetic biology is making new products using biological components. So what that kind of usually means is you genetically engineer things like microbes to produce new chemical compounds. Those can be flavors or therapeutics. But synthetic biology also includes companies that are doing like lab-grown meat, which just means growing cells in a lab for human consumption. And so our company is specializing in sequencing and analyzing, DNA sequencing and analyzing DNA sequencing data.
So what does that mean for like normal people?
So, so DNA sequencing data can be used for a lot of things. In medicine, DNA sequencing is used to identify, for example, mutations in cancer patients. Or you can collect a lot of patient clinical samples and find out what mutations, for example, are correlated or causing breast cancer by looking at the DNA sequences and finding the mutated genes. Getting high quality genomes of organisms allows you to do genetic engineering experiments or identify, for example, in our case, biosynthetic gene clusters, which are genes that are physically close to each other in the genome that are usually working together to produce a chemical compound. So in our proof of concept study, we have been identifying microbes from the wild of Okinawa that produce antifungal compounds. They produce chemical compounds that kill fungus.
And what are the benefits of that? What is this used for?
So one problem in the world that is maybe going to be even bigger in the future is microbes that are antibiotic resistant, that infect people either on the skin or systemically, internally. And so we are trying to identify new compounds that can kill those funguses that could be threats to people, or even like foot fungus. I don't know why I'm pointing at my foot. My feet are fine. So once you identify microbes that are producing these antifungal products, you need to identify the genes that are actually responsible in the genome for producing that compound, for the microbe producing that compound.
How do you like sequence the DNA?
Yeah, so usually after we've obtained microbes, for example, from the soil, then they've been screened for antifungal activity and isolated. So you have like a pure strain. Then we'll culture, like do a small culture in the lab to grow the microbe, and the microbe duplicates. And then do some lab processes to purify the DNA. And after we purify the DNA, we sequence it with nanopore and Illumina technologies. Nanopore produces long DNA reads, usually with kind of a high error rate, and Illumina has short DNA reads with a low error rate. And our company has developed a pipeline to combine that data and assemble a genome, a consensus sequence that is the microbe's genome. And that can be used for all these genetic engineering purposes. These are culture plates that we use for culturing microbes. Some of these are what are called streaks. These are E. coli microbe samples streaked on the plate. This one has some colonies. Colonies are bacteria or microbes that are growing from one single microbe. So one single microbe was isolated on the plate, then it starts duplicating and you get a little spot called a colony. These are consumable materials that are used when we do DNA sequencing on our Oxford Nanopore Minion device. There's some buffers in here and you load the samples. Here is a little chip where the actual DNA goes through nanopores. All that data is collected through this device. This is one of the sequencing technologies we use. our technical strategy is to do hybrid sequencing. That's our specialty. We use nanopore sequencing as well as Illumina. This is one of the parts of a summary report after sequencing is completed. And this is a histogram that's showing all the lengths of the reads that are collected from the DNA sequencing. When we're using nanopore sequencing, our goal is to get long reads. But a lot of these reads have errors in them. And so that's why we end up using Illumina sequencing as well, which has short reads, but very accurate reads. And so when we combine the data, we can assemble a very high quality, low error genome. So it's very true to the original organism's genome.
You talked about doing this hybrid process of 2 different types of DNA sequencing. Why do you use that process?
The long reads allow us to fill in any gaps in the assembled genome that would be there. The gaps would be there if we only used the short reads. So those short reads, as I said, are high fidelity, but because they're short, you might miss some areas in a genome that you're sequencing if you only use the short reads. And if you only use the long reads, when you assemble the genome, which is called de novo assembly, when you don't already know the sequence of the genome you're assembling, you're kind of assembling it for the first time. If you only use the long reads, you'll have a lot of errors. And for our work, we need extremely high fidelity, complete genomes. And that is because anytime you have a mutation in a gene, or you get the sequence wrong, like when you're sequencing it, that would mean that the gene usually doesn't function properly. So like, a single mutation in a gene in your body can cause cancer, but if you're trying to produce a chemical compound and you think you have the sequence right, but you actually have one base pair wrong, maybe you won't be able to produce that compound when you are using that enzyme.
So what's a base pair?
Oh, like ATGC.
Sure.
So, yeah. So the
ATGC.
Yeah. So the sequence in your DNA is made up of ATGC, and these are the fundamental chemical building blocks of your DNA.
If people wanted to get in contact with you about your company, how would they go about contacting you?
They can check out our website, www.tupac.bio.
Cool, man. Thanks.
But I'm striving every day to be better.